Welcome to Lesson 5 in this Greek for Beginners course. In this lesson, we're going to cover infinitives. We're going to have a first look at adjectives. And we're going to have a look at adverbs. But before all that, just a little bit of revision. We're going to start with some sentences which should be familiar from previous lessons. But because it takes a while to get familiar with new vocabulary, I've included just a few reminders and pointers at the top of the screen. Let's have a look at the first sentence. Well, we begin with the, and then didaskalos means teacher. Graphe means writes, and 10, epistolen is the letter. Let's look at number 2. Hai korai are the girls. Akousi is our verb, and that means they hear. Now moving on, we have a word for the, but then we have another word for the. And in English, we can't put two thes together, so we need to do a little bit of rearrangement. Tous is in the same case as logus. So we're going to get rid of this the, and instead I will write together in English the words. Now we take the second word for the, which is to. That's in the same case as angelou. They are in the genitive case, and we translate the genitive as of. So we write of the messenger. And if you're uncertain about that, do look back over lesson 2. The third sentence begins with hepta. Hepta is a number, which we met in lesson 3, and hepta is the number 7. 7 slaves go or are going towards the house. Now we're going to spice these sentences up a little bit by adding some new words. And the word I'm going to add into the first sentence is ou, and I'm going to write it just here. A little word that changes the meaning completely, because ou is a negative, which means not. So I can't just add not in English, it doesn't quite work that way, but if I write doesn't, then I have changed the meaning, and I've got the teacher doesn't write the letter. Now, you'd have thought we could add ou to every sentence to make each of those negative too, but it becomes a little bit more complicated. In number 2, if I write ou here, meaning not, before the verb, then I've got a vowel at the end of ou, followed by another vowel at the beginning of akousi. Now, it's not forbidden to put two vowels together in Greek, but often the language avoids it. And after ou, Greek likes to put a kappa if the next word begins with a vowel. So ook also means not. And here I will put in don't to make that sentence negative in English. The girls don't hear the words of the messenger. The third version is different again. Now supposing I want to say not 7, but 6 slaves go towards the house, then I'll need more words. Well, first of all, not. Ou. Aha, the next word begins with a vowel. Should I put a kappa? Well, no, because this is a vowel with a rough breathing on it. If that were written in English letters, I would write it like this. Hepta with an H. So instead of putting a kappa on the end of ou, like that, I'm actually going to use this letter here, a chai, because a chai makes the sound of a kappa followed by an H. Ch, uchepta. The two words then roll on from each other quite nicely. Now, to tidy this up, I'll make space for my English translation. Uch means not, so I will now write not 7, And now I want to say in English, but 6 slaves. So we need the Greek word for but, which is alla. And the word for 6 we met in the previous lesson is hex. So to recap, the Greek word for not is ou. If the next word is followed by a vowel, the Greek word for not is ook. But if that vowel has a rough breathing on it, the word for not is uch. U, ook and uch all mean not. In this slide we also met the word for but, and that word but is alla. We're now going to look at a new form of the verb, and the verb form we're going to look at is known as the infinitive. The infinitive is, strictly speaking, the simplest form of the verb. It has no person endings, no endings for I am doing it, you, he, she, or it, or so on. And that is why it is known as the infinitive, because it is without endings. But there is one ending which is added to the infinitive. The same ending, it never changes, is added to the stem. Let's have a look at that ending. Let us begin with our model verb powo. The stem is pow, and this verb, as we recall, means stop. Now, if I add to that stem the letters epsilon, iota, nu, and those letters never change, I have made an infinitive. Let's write it out again without the dash in the middle. Powein, and this verb means to stop. In Greek, you'll meet it in sentences such as I order you to stop, or I persuade you to stop, or I am able to stop. In fact, it's those three verbs, order, persuade, and be able, that we need to meet next if we're going to be able to deal with the infinitive in any sentences. So, for vocabulary, write down these. Keluo is I order. Peitho is I persuade. The third and final verb I'm going to give you, which you need to translate some infinitive sentences, is quite an unusual one. It is hoios, and then a new word, t. This is the letter tor with an apostrophe to represent a missing epsilon. And finally, Amy. And this means I am able. This third one is, as you can see from its construction, rather unusual. Amy by itself means I am. And that part of the verb is going to change if you want to say you are able, we are able, and so on. The te here has basically no meaning at all. Literally, te can be used to mean and, but in this construction it really doesn't have a meaning. And as for hoios, its literal meaning is such. But in this construction, you can think of it as meaning able. Hoios is an adjective, and so it's going to change its ending depending on whose person the verb is. So supposing we wanted to say we are able, I'd have to make that hoios plural, and so you would actually get hoioi, that's changed, the ending. I'm going to keep that t, that never changes. And I need now the form for we are, which is esmen. It's a curious sort of verb, this one, but in many ways it's easier to recognise than many other verbs, because there's no other verb in the Greek language which has got that t in the middle, and it sort of leaps off the page at you, I hope. But be prepared to find it with different endings on the first word and on the last. So now let's look at some examples. And each time there's going to be one of these verbs, kelluo, I order, peitho, I persuade, and hoios te emi, I am able. By keeping these up here at the top of the screen, it means that you'll have them easily ready to refer to. So let's just get those meanings in there. Remember also that if a verb ends in the letters epsilon, iota, nu, it is an infinitive, and you're to translate it with the English word to before what that verb means. Now, armed with those aide-memoire, let's get started. Hoi douloi. How about an uch, which we just met earlier this lesson? Hoioi to AC. Fugain. Well, I hope you immediately recognise that hoioi te AC is this new and rather strangely constructed verb which means be able. And I hope you also recognise that the epsilon iota nu at the end of fugain is our infinitive. So we're going to translate that verb as to do what the action is. Now let's go back to the beginning and fill in the rest. Hoi douloi are the slaves. Uch means not, and it's one of the three versions of not, this one ending with the letter chai, because the next verb begins with a rough breathing. Hoioi te AC means they are able, so I need to fit in the words around my not. So are goes here, and able here. They are not able, and now we're left with our infinitive, which we remember means to. Fugo means flee, so fugain means to flee. The slaves are not able to flee. Here's another example. Keliuso ten koren again tous hippus. Let's first of all identify the new keywords. Well, keliuso is part of the verb which means order. Let's have a closer look at it. It's got a sigma between the stem and the ending. That, we may recall, is a marker of the future tense. The final letter, omega, is the letter for the first person singular. So putting all that together, we must say, I will order. Looking out for our infinitive, we're looking for a verb which ends epsilon, iota, nu. And here it is, again, which means to lead. Filling in the gaps, I will order the girl to lead the horses. Let's try a third sentence. Hostrategos hoios te esti peithane ton straton. This uses two of the new words we've met in this lesson, and here they are. Hoios te esti, and we have the infinitive peithane. Let's put the translation together. Hostrategos, I hope you recall, is the general. Remember that this is a word which is made of two Greek roots. The strat part of it means something to do with the military. There's so many words to do with soldiers, camp, army, which begin with strat. And of course we see it in the root of the English word strategy. The ergos part of the word is connected to ago, which means lead. So this is a leader of the army, the general. Hoios te esti, we've seen before, is able. Now here's our infinitive, so we're going to put to before it. Pethein is to persuade. And we will finish with the army. Now supposing we then wanted to add to that sentence, and we wanted to say, for example, to persuade the army to run, you'd then need to add another word in the infinitive. So I'm going to just give you the root of the word for memory. Trecho means I run. Cut off the omega, which means I am doing the verb, and you get the stem trech. Can you finish that sentence by adding the word to run? Pause the video and see if you can fill in the gap. Now I'm going to show you what you should put. Trechein here is a verb which means to run. And since we've lengthened the sentence, we can now get rid of those full stops. The general is able to persuade the army to run. And that is a wonderful sentence with two infinitives in it. Now we're going to look at something different and add adjectives to nouns. What do you see here are 4 nouns, 2 of them singular, 2 of them plural. And their meanings are hodoulos, the slave, Herthea, the goddess, hoi logoi, the words, and hai korai, the girls. Now let's make those a little more interesting by adding an adjective to each one. So let's take the first one, and if I move the word doulos away from its definite article and add agathos between the article and the noun, I've now added the word for good. And so I've now made the good slave. And good in Greek here is agathos. Now let's do the same to the next example. I'm going to move thea away from the article, and I'm going to add the word for good between the article and the noun. This time, though, I'm not going to spell it as agathos, but I will spell it differently, agather, and that has made the expression the good goddess. So clearly the word for good could be spelt agathos, or it could be spelt agather. Why does it have different spellings? The answer, in fact, is something you're probably familiar with if you've learnt any language, modern or ancient, other than English, because in most languages, adjectives have different forms according to whether the noun they describe is masculine or feminine, or whether it's singular or plural. And also, if it's a language which has got case endings as well, like Greek's got, then the adjective has to have the same case ending as the noun. We haven't made an awful lot of gender in our Greek course so far. We've talked about different families of nouns, different declensions of nouns, and we've met the idea that those nouns which end in os are usually masculine, and those which end in eta or alpha, like they are usually feminine. In fact, you can always tell the gender of a Greek noun by looking at the article that goes with it. Ho is the masculine article, and her is the feminine. So agathos is the masculine form of the word for good, and agather is the feminine. Adjectives have to change between singular and plural nouns as well. So let's have a look at our plural examples. Hoi logoi is the words. Now let's move that word logoi to the side, and we will add agathoi between the article and the noun. This is a third version of the word for good, and the ending oi here matches the nominative, the masculine plural ending. So we can now have the good words. Finally, hai korai means the girls. You may have noticed a pattern here, particularly in the first and the third examples, and perhaps you won't be surprised when I add the word for good, it is agathai. I've chosen examples where the adjective usually rhymes with the ending of the noun. It doesn't in every case have exactly the same ending, and one example you may have noticed is in the second example here, where agather ends in an eta, but thea ends in an alpha. And this, as we've seen, shouldn't be a problem, because for these first declension nouns, which are almost all feminine in fact, the ending can be eta, it can be alpha. You'll find both. So those two do agree, even though it's a different letter. Now, let's stay with these words, but try something a little bit different. What we're going to do is we're going to write the same phrases, but in a different way. Ho doulos, ho agathos. If we translate this expression into English, literally it gives us the slave, the again, good, which clearly doesn't make much sense. In fact, though, this expression means exactly the same as ho agathos doulos above. It's an alternative way of expressing an adjective and a noun. The rule is you take the noun with its article, you repeat the article, and then you add the adjective. It's a little unusual, and it's not used perhaps as commonly as the method above is, but you do find it in Greek, both in Classical Greek and in New Testament Greek. So, for example, her thea, her agatha is an alternative way of saying her agatha, thea. And similarly for the others, hoi, logoi, hoi, agathoi is another way of saying hoi, agathoi, logoi. And the last one, hai, korai, hai, agathoi. Let's meet a few more adjectives. First up is deinos. Deinos is the root of our word dinosaur. Dinosaur the word comes in two parts. The first part means terrible and the second part means lizard. So the origin of the word dinosaur is a terrible lizard. And that's because deinos means terrible, or it could mean strange. Now, if that word terrible or strange is used to describe a masculine noun, then the form deinos is used if it's singular and nominative. But supposing it were feminine, then we would write deiner. Again, only if it's nominative and singular. Now there is a third gender in neuter, one we've not met yet in this course, but now is the time just to have a look at it. If it agrees with a neuter noun, then the ending would be deinon. Now, the reason I give these is that often you will find in a word list or a dictionary the adjective listed in all three forms. The first ending in os, the second ending in air or alpha, remember we see that too, and the third ending in on. So, for convenience, we often list these adjectives like this: deinos, dash air, dash on, as a reminder that those are the three possible endings in the nominative singular forms. Now there's a separate ending for each case, each gender, and of course separate endings for singular and for plural. So if you really want to get your head round all these endings, you need to find a table and learn all those endings. But for the moment, we're just going to introduce the adjectives as off, and on, and then we'll try a few sentences which show those adjectives in action. Our next adjective is chalepos, and again I'm going to write chalepos -er if it's feminine, or with the ending on if it's neuter. That's another adjective with two different meanings. It can mean difficult and it can mean dangerous, often used to describe, for example, a journey. Here's another one, philios. Now the feminine of philios actually has an alpha, not an eta, and the neuter on. So philios, philia, philion, and that means friendly. Now a pair of adjectives which should be familiar to you from English words, mikros, on, and macros, on. These form the root of many English words beginning micro or macro. Mikros is small and macros is big, specifically long. Well done if you had guessed those. Let's look a little bit more closely at those feminine forms. As you know, sometimes the feminine nominative ends in eta, and sometimes it ends in alpha. Now, it's not just a random choice whether it's eta or alpha. There's a reason why one vowel is used rather than the other. And although there are one or two exceptions to this, it's a rule which is fairly well applied, fairly consistently applied. If the stem of your noun or adjective ends in a consonant, deinos, for example, ends in a nu, chalepos, for example, ends in a pi, then the feminine will have an eta. If, however, the stem of your adjective or noun ends in a vowel or in the letter rho, then in the feminine form there will be an alpha. Now, as I have said, there are a couple of exceptions to this, but generally speaking this applies to nouns and adjectives. Let's see some of these new adjectives in action. We'll just move their meanings out of the way so that they're there for reference. And that gives us space for some sentences. Here's our first one. That one means we go, or you could say we are going, into the terrible, I suppose I could say strange, but terrible makes a tiny bit more sense here, river. Here's another. The friendly goddess. Notice I've chosen the alternative word positioning, which literally means the goddess, the friendly. Now, means not, and say is a future verb marked by the sigma there between the stem and the ending. Let's take those together. Will not hinder the victory. Here's a third example to practice some of the grammar you've met recently. Ekeliuomen ton doulon graphein ten makran epistolen. And that means we were ordering. I've used the imperfect tense there. Ton doulon, the slave. Graphein, to write, an infinitive. Ten makran epistolen, the long letter. Now with makran, I've now given you an example of an adjective in a case which I haven't yet shown you in this lesson. You've seen the accusative case on nouns, and here is the adjective following suit. It's agreeing with epistolen. Well done if you got that. Finally in this lesson, we're going to learn to turn adjectives into adverbs. This in Greek is very easy, and there is one key rule which is applied to just about every adjective. You recall that adjectives such as kalapos, for example, or denos, in their masculine nominative singular form end in omicron sigma. Now let's remove that omicron sigma and replace it with omega sigma. We then have chalipos, and that is our adverb. Chalipos meant difficult or dangerous. Chalipos means with difficulty or dangerously. Now you have a go. Denos, you know, is the adjective meaning terrible or strange. Can you make the Greek for terribly or strangely? Here is the answer. It just remains for us now to practice some of those in sentences. Here's the first one. Ho angelos elege denos. That means the messenger. This next word is imperfect, it means was speaking. If you weren't sure about that, here is your augment, which is added to the verb in the imperfect tense. Leg is the stem of the verb, and that's what you'd find in the dictionary. And the final epsilon is the ending. Denos, that means terribly. Of course, it could be strangely. The messenger was speaking strangely. Let's stick with terribly for now. Now let's have another example. Hoi strategoi. Chalipos. Lususi. Ton hippon. The generals. With difficulty. Will release. I suppose I could say loosen, untie the horse. I know that this is a plural because there's sigma between the stem and the ending in the verb lususi. If you're up for another, here is the third and the last example. You will speak in a friendly way, philios. I'll leave that to the end. Tous agathous logus, the good words. Meaning that the whole sentence translates as, you will speak the good words in a friendly way. That concludes Lesson 5.